On the morning of Friday, the 11th of May, 1866, the City of London came apart. Crowds filled Lombard Street. Banks bolted their doors. The safest name in British finance had just collapsed, and the panic it started has a name to this day: Black Friday. But here is what almost nobody knew. 9 months earlier, that same firm had sold shares in itself to the public, and on the day it did, it was already insolvent by £4 to £5 million. A partner had personally cut every mention of the bad assets out of the prospectus. This is the story of how the most trusted house in the city sold the public a corpse, and how the crash that followed forced the Bank of England to invent the rule that still saves banks today. This film is presented for historical and informational purposes. Every figure in this story is long deceased, and every fact is drawn from the public record, the law reports, and the Bank of England's own archive. If you enjoy these stories, consider subscribing so you never miss a case. The safest name in the city. Overend Gurney and Company was not a high street bank. It was the bank that banks used, a discount house. If a merchant held a bill of exchange, a promise to be paid in 3 months, Overend would buy that promise today for slightly less than its face value and wait to collect. It was, quite simply, the largest discount house in London. At its height, the deposits held by this single firm were roughly equal to the deposits of its 3 biggest competitors combined. It was known as the Corner House, and its word was as good as the Bank of England's. The name came from the Gurneys, a Quaker banking family from Norwich, a family whose reputation was built on plain living and absolute probity. Samuel Gurney had turned the firm into the beating heart of the London money market. When he died in 1856, that reputation was the firm's greatest asset, and the men who inherited it were about to spend it. The rot. Because the new partners grew bored of the quiet business of buying bills, they wanted more, so they began lending long and lending badly, into ships, into railways, into dock companies, and into a vast, hungry ironworks on the Thames. Look at the arithmetic the Bank of England later reconstructed. The genuine bill-broking business was still making about £200,000 a year. But from late 1860, the firm as a whole was losing an average of £500,000 a year. It was bleeding quietly for half a decade. The Bank of England published an illustrative list of just 14 of those riskier loans. Together, they had lent £3.5 million. The estimated value of those loans when the books were handed over was £711,000. 14 loans, nearly £2.8 million, simply gone. One entry says everything. The advance tied to the Millwall Ironworks, £422,000. Estimated recovery value, nothing at all. Not reduced, not impaired, 0. The float. So in July 1865, the partners did something that would have been impossible a decade earlier. They turned the firm into a limited liability company and sold it to the public. 100,000 shares, £50 each on paper. Investors paid just £15 down. And that is the detail that matters. £15 paid, £35 left uncalled. If the company ever failed, the shareholders could be ordered to hand over the rest. The buyers were not just investing. Without quite understanding it, they were standing surety for everything the firm had already lost. What did they know? The Bank of England's account is blunt. A partner had cut any reference to the bad assets out of the prospectus. The guarantee protecting the new company was time-limited, a fact visible only in a special deed that almost nobody came to inspect. And the incoming directors decided they did not need an accountant to look at the books. By the highest reasonable estimate, on the day those shares went on sale, the hole in the accounts was already £4 to £5 million, on a balance sheet of around 20 million. The most respected firm in the city was, on the arithmetic, already dead. The shares still traded above £25 that October. Black Friday. The end came from a courtroom. On the 9th of May, 1866, a court ruled that Overend could not collect a debt owed to it by a railway company. The market smelled blood. The run began within hours, and the firm went to the Bank of England, hat in hand. The bank sent in a committee, led by a former governor, to inspect the books. What they found was not a cash flow problem. It was a grave. One of the inspectors reported that the firm was, in his word, rotten. The Bank of England refused to lend, not because it was cruel, but because Overend was not illiquid. At about 3:30 on the afternoon of the 10th of May, a notice appeared on the door of the corner house. "A severe run on our deposits and resources," it read, "has compelled us to suspend payment." The greatest discount house in London had stopped. The next morning, the panic swallowed the city. And now, the Bank of England did the exact opposite of what it had done for Overend. It lent and lent and lent. Upwards of £4 million in a single day, an unprecedented sum, in the bank's own words. About 10 million in the first week. It nearly emptied itself doing it. The bank began that Friday with a reserve of £5,727,000 and expected to end the day with under 3 million. Its cash fell from 16% of its assets to 2% in 3 days. So the governor wrote to the chancellor, and the government suspended the law of money itself, the Bank Charter Act, on one condition. And here is the strangest fact in the whole affair. The bank never used the power. Not one unbacked note was ever printed. Simply announcing that the bank was allowed to break the rules was enough to stop the panic, but the cost was real. Bank rates stood at 10% for 95 days, and by most estimates around 200 companies were destroyed in the wreckage. The reckoning. 3 years later, 6 directors of Overend Gurney stood trial at the Old Bailey for fraud over that prospectus. The Lord Chief Justice told the jury the men had been guilty of a grave error, but not of a crime. Every one of them walked free. The bill went to the victims instead. The uncalled capital was called in, and shareholders who had bought a piece of the safest name in England were ordered to pay again. One of them, a merchant named Henry Peake, had bought 2,000 shares on the open market. He was made to hand over £100,000, and when he sued, the House of Lords agreed the prospectus had been deceptive, then told him he had no right to sue at all. One man watched all of this and drew the lesson. Walter Bagehot wrote that the firm's losses had been made in a manner so reckless and so foolish that one would think a child who had lent money in the city of London would have lent it better. In 1873, he set down the rule the crisis had taught. In a panic, lend freely, at a high rate on good security. Lend to the solvent, let the rotten fail. It is the doctrine every central bank still reaches for when the money runs out. It was written in the ruins of the house that was too respectable to question, and the men who emptied it were never punished at all.